My name is Josephine Harris, and at 74, I have learned a harsh truth. The people you love most can hurt you in ways you never saw coming. There's a weight to the silence that surrounds me now, one that's suffocating in its depth. It's not the kind of silence that brings peace, but one that speaks volumes about the distance that's grown between me and my only son, Thomas. It was a little over 2 years ago when everything changed. That evening, it all came to a head, and it's a memory that still lingers like an unwanted shadow. The pain of it, raw and unrelenting, resurfaces when I least expect it. I've heard people say that time heals all wounds, but I've come to realize that's only half true. Time doesn't heal the wounds caused by betrayal. It buries them only to have them erupt when you least anticipate it. You see, it was supposed to be a special night. Thomas had been promoted to vice president of his company, a career milestone that any parent would want to celebrate. He had insisted I join him and his wife Emily at the upscale restaurant where they had reservations. It was a big deal for him. After all, he had worked tirelessly for years to climb that corporate ladder. He was my only child, and for a while he was the light of my life. His joy was my joy. His success my success. We used to be close before everything changed. It wasn't until the evening of the celebration that I realized how far we had drifted. My son, the one I had raised with love and care, no longer saw me as family. I was just another obstacle to be managed, another duty to be tolerated. As I sit here now looking out of my kitchen window at the quiet street outside, I can't help but reflect on that night. It's hard not to wonder, how did we get here? When did my role in Thomas's life shift from a mother to a mere inconvenience? And yet, as much as I try to bury the hurt, it's always there, lingering. Let me take you back to that evening, to the night when my son and his wife made a decision that would change everything. They were so concerned about what others would think, about their image, that they had forgotten one very important thing. The truth is, I had known for some time that my presence in their lives had become an afterthought. Emily, with her designer handbags and perfectly crafted, gleaming smile, had a way of making me feel invisible. Her ambition was as sharp as her high heels, and it didn't take long before I became something she tolerated rather than something she valued. I had tried not to notice it. I tried to convince myself that I was just being overly sensitive, that maybe I was imagining things. But then came the moment when my suspicions were confirmed, and all my years of patience and hope gave way to a harsh reality. I remember standing in my living room, carefully adjusting my blouse, trying to make sure I looked presentable. After all, this was a celebration for Thomas, my son's success. I didn't want to be the old woman who looked out of place, the one who couldn't keep up with the polished, perfect image they had created for themselves. I'd spent my whole life making sure my family had what they needed, making sure they never went without. So for this evening, I tried to make an effort. I wanted to be a part of their world, even if it felt foreign. And then they arrived. Thomas was dressed sharply, his suit a reflection of his new position, but his face held a look I knew all too well. It wasn't the joy I had hoped for. It was the stress of trying to please Emily, of keeping up appearances. And then there was Emily, always so composed, so perfectly put together. She took one look at me, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "You look nice, Josephine." It should have been a compliment. It should have felt like a warm embrace, but instead it felt like a judgment. I didn't look nice to her. I looked old, a relic of a time she no longer cared to acknowledge. "We need to go," Thomas said abruptly. "The reservation's for 7:30. I nodded, but there was a sinking feeling in my chest. I had hoped this night would be different, that maybe, just maybe, things had changed. But it was already clear, it hadn't. When we reached the curb, Thomas made an announcement that made my heart drop into my stomach. "We'll take the Lexus," he said, nodding toward the sleek, expensive car parked behind my own modest sedan. "It makes a better impression." It was a small thing, but it cut deep. My car was the one Charles and I had picked out together, practical and reliable. But to them it wasn't good enough. It wasn't flashy enough, and in that moment I knew they had moved beyond me. I climbed into the back seat of their luxury car, my mind spinning with thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. There was no room for me in their world anymore, not unless I played by their rules. As we drove to the restaurant, the silence in the car was deafening. Emily tapped away on her phone, as if I weren't even there, and Thomas drove with a focus that seemed to border on frantic. They didn't talk to me. They didn't ask how I was doing, or if I was excited. They didn't care. And that's when it hit me. The night was never about me. It was about them, their image, their success. I was just a backdrop to their perfect lives. And by the time we pulled up to the restaurant, I knew the night would end in a way that would forever change the way I saw them. But at that moment, I had no idea just how far they were willing to go. Before I begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not the only one, and if what I say touches something in you, hit that subscribe button. It helps more people understand what elder betrayal really looks like. Now let me tell you what happened. It's strange, isn't it? How time can change everything, how the people you love, the ones you've raised and nurtured, can gradually transform before your very eyes. One moment they are your world, and the next they are strangers you don't even recognize. That's how it felt, watching Thomas and Emily slip away from me. The slow, insidious drift from family to mere acquaintance, from the people I loved to a pair of individuals whose love was nothing more than an inconvenient burden. When Thomas first married Emily, I thought it was just a phase, a new relationship, a spark of excitement in his life that might burn itself out. But it didn't. It grew. And with it, something darker blossomed in my son. It wasn't that he changed overnight. It was the little things, the subtle shifts that I ignored at first, thinking they were just part of growing up. But I should have seen the signs earlier. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself that Emily, with her sharp tongue and even sharper ambition, was just what Thomas needed to push him forward. She was an ambitious woman, always looking for the next best thing. I'd seen that in her from the moment she entered our lives. The way she talked about status, about success, about everything being just a little better than it had been before. It wasn't that I disliked her. No, it was more than that. I felt something else. A sense of displacement, as though I no longer fit into their world. When I think back on it now, it seems almost comical how quickly I became a resource to them rather than a mother. At first it was the little things. "Mom, you really shouldn't be driving anymore. It's too dangerous," Thomas would say, a note of concern in his voice that I should have recognized as rehearsed. "We'll take care of it, just let us handle it." He would offer to take care of everything, the things I'd been managing just fine for years, just like that. It was as though my independence, my very ability to stand on my own, was something he no longer valued. And then there was Emily, with her perfectly executed smile. She'd visit, sit at my kitchen table, and sip her coffee with the kind of practiced politeness that left a bitter taste in my mouth. "Josephine," she'd say, "you know it might be time to update this place. You should really think about modernizing a bit." Modernizing. To her, my home was nothing more than an outdated relic, something to be discarded in favor of sleek, cold lines and minimalism. But this home, the one filled with memories of my husband Charles, the one where we raised our son, where so much love had been invested, was my sanctuary. And yet they no longer saw it that way. They saw it as an asset, something that could be turned into cash. Emily would talk to Thomas in hushed tones as they walked through the house, her eyes scanning every corner with a critical assessment that seemed to judge not just the space, but me too. I could hear the way she spoke of things like resale value and market trends, as though this house, this home, was just a stepping stone on their way to the next great thing. They no longer wanted me. They wanted what I could give them. My resources, my money. At first I resisted. I clung to the small things that still made me feel independent. My weekly trips to the grocery store, my drive to church, the way I kept my garden, even though the weeds crept up more often than they used to. But over time I couldn't deny it any longer. I was being controlled, my every decision, even the smallest ones, quietly usurped by their need to manage my life. Josephine, you really shouldn't be cleaning those gutters by yourself, Thomas would say, his voice laced with false concern. It's just too risky for you, don't you think? It wasn't concern though, it was control, and I let them bit by bit because I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to fight for myself without losing them completely. After all, they were my only family, the ones I had raised and loved. If I pushed them away, what would I have left? But the most cutting blow came not from their words, but from their actions. Emily's idea of love, of family, was wrapped in a cold transactional kind of care. The way she looked at me with pity when she suggested I stop driving. The way she would suggest changes to my home, as if my comfort didn't matter. I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. I was just someone they had to manage, someone whose only value came from the resources I had. They had forgotten something though. They had forgotten that I had been a school administrator for over 30 years. I had managed classrooms full of rebellious teens, negotiated with parents, handled crises, and built relationships with people who didn't want to be managed. I knew how to read people, how to recognize manipulation when I saw it. I knew when I was being subtly pushed aside for their convenience, when the love I thought we shared was nothing more than an illusion. As they continued to manage my life, I began to see them for what they truly were. Emily with her constant need for validation, and Thomas desperately trying to live up to her expectations, were no longer the son and daughter-in-law I once knew. They were strangers, and their true intentions were becoming more apparent every day. But there was something they didn't understand. As they chipped away at my autonomy, they were unknowingly building a fire inside me. A fire that would eventually consume everything they had worked so hard to create. It's a subtle thing, control. It doesn't come in the form of a loud declaration or a fierce demand. It creeps in little by little, like a fog that slowly rolls in, making it hard to see just how far you've been dragged until it's too late. And that's how they did it, bit by bit. They took pieces of my life, until one day I was left wondering who I was anymore. It started with small, well-intentioned suggestions. At first I believed them. After all, they were my family, my only family. Surely they knew best. They were just looking out for me, weren't they? You really shouldn't be driving at night anymore, Mom, Thomas said one evening, his voice wrapped in false concern. I just returned from one of my weekly trips to visit my church group, a small tradition I'd kept for years. I loved those evenings. They kept me connected to the world outside my home, to friends who understood me. But that evening, something in Thomas's voice told me it wasn't just concern, it was more. You're getting older, he continued, his eyes darting to Emily, who sat across the room, nodding in agreement. It's just too dangerous for you. We can take care of the driving for you. You don't need to be out there in the dark. I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't their concern for my safety that bothered me. It was the way they made my independence feel like a burden. I had been driving for decades, but suddenly I was no longer capable. Suddenly I was fragile, unable to manage something as simple as a drive to church. I'm fine, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, but the words had no weight. They didn't need to be loud. They had already decided. Emily's voice chimed in with her signature smile, the kind that was never quite genuine, but carefully curated for moments like this. It's for your own good, Josephine, she said, her tone sugar-sweet, but the words sharp beneath the surface. We'll arrange for a car service to take you. We don't want you to be out there alone, especially at night. You'll feel so much better knowing someone's there to help you. And just like that, my freedom was taken from me. Not with a fight or an argument, but with the suggestion of love and care. It was easier to go along with it than to argue. I didn't want to make them angry. I didn't want to be the stubborn old woman who couldn't see reason. But every time I agreed, a little piece of me felt like it was slipping away. And it wasn't just the driving. It was the little things, the quiet, insidious changes, the way they looked at me when I made a decision about the house. You shouldn't be climbing that ladder to clean the gutters, Josephine, Thomas would say, his words wrapped in faux concern, "It's dangerous. Let us hire someone." I could have done it myself. I'd been cleaning the gutters for years, every season, without issue. But now they were taking that away too. I knew what they were really saying. "You're too old for this. You're not capable anymore." And so I let them. I let them tell me what was too dangerous, what I couldn't do, what I should give up. And I did it for their sake, for the sake of family, for the sake of love. But each time it became harder to ignore the growing resentment that started to bubble inside me. The house too became a point of contention. The things I had worked my whole life to maintain, the things that held memories of Charles and me, suddenly they weren't good enough. Emily would sweep through my home, her eyes scanning every corner, every piece of furniture. "This place really could use some updates," she'd say, as if the warmth of my home, the one Charles and I had built together, was no longer worth anything. I'd hear her whisper to Thomas about how much money they could make by selling the house, how it could be better spent on something more modern, more upscale. I didn't say anything at first, but the weight of it hung on my chest, suffocating me. They no longer saw this home as a place of love and family. They saw it as a commodity, a potential profit, and I was the obstacle standing in the way of their perfect life. It wasn't just the house, it was my life. My choices, my independence, everything I had worked so hard to maintain for myself, was now under siege. Every time I agreed to something, whether it was letting them hire someone to do something I could still do, or not questioning their decisions, it chipped away at me. I didn't feel like I was living anymore. I felt like I was being managed, as if I were no longer the matriarch of this family, but just an asset to be managed, a burden to be dealt with. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. I didn't see how far they had already pushed me, until one night, when I sat in the living room, watching them bicker about something trivial. Their conversation was punctuated by the sound of my thoughts, a dull hum in the background, that I couldn't ignore anymore. I was no longer a person in their lives. I was just something to be moved around, something to be taken care of, something to be hidden away, when it no longer fit their picture-perfect image. But I wasn't gone yet, and that, they would soon learn, was a mistake. The evening of Thomas's promotion had all the trappings of something special, but the truth of it was already starting to feel like a distant dream. He had worked so hard for that position, and I was proud of him, truly. I thought this was going to be a moment to celebrate, family coming together, to acknowledge the long hours, the sacrifices, the late nights, and to recognize the man Thomas had become. I had envisioned us at the dinner table, laughing, reminiscing about the old days, with Charles by my side. His presence felt even though he was gone. I longed for a moment like that, one where the distance between us could finally close, but that's not what happened. Instead, Emily took charge of the night, from the moment she stepped into my living room, her perfectly pressed dress, shimmering under the dim light. "We need to go," she said with a practiced smile, her voice flat, like this was just another business transaction. She didn't offer a moment to catch up, didn't ask if I was ready, or if I was excited to celebrate. She barely even acknowledged me, aside from a cursory glance. "Mom, let's go. We're running late," Thomas said, his voice tight, betraying a hint of stress. He was distracted, barely looking at me, as he hustled toward the door. I stood up from my chair, unsure of what to expect. They had promised it would be a celebration. They had invited me, hadn't they? But something about the way they moved together, the way Emily hovered just a little too close to Thomas, made me feel like an outsider in my own home. I wasn't sure I was a part of their world anymore. As we walked outside, my heart sank. There, parked on the driveway, was the Lexus, the sleek, glossy car that glistened under the street lights. It looked like it belonged to someone else entirely, someone far more important than me. It was the kind of car I had always viewed with admiration from a distance, but never imagined I'd ever have the privilege to sit in. And in that moment, it wasn't a privilege, it felt like an order. "You'll take the Lexus," Thomas said, his voice cold and detached. "It makes a better impression." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. My car, The car Charles and I had bought together, the one that had carried us through decades of memories, was no longer enough. In that moment, my entire life, my choices, everything that had felt like home, was dismissed. They were too good for my old dependable sedan. They needed something that spoke louder, something that was a reflection of their success, their image, something that set them apart from the very life I had given them. I was too small for their new world, it seemed. I climbed into the back of the Lexus, my hands trembling slightly, as I settled into the plush leather seats. The scent of new car interior lingered in the air, and as I looked out the window, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the years behind me. They had moved on without me. This was their world now, and I was just a visitor, clinging to the edge of a family that had outgrown me. The ride to the restaurant was unnervingly silent. Emily tapped away at her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Thomas focused on the road, his expression tense, as if trying to keep up with the expectations he thought he had to meet. I could see him slipping further away, his mind more concerned with the opinions of others than with the woman who had once been his entire world. When we finally arrived, I could tell it wasn't going to be the family celebration I had imagined. Aria, the restaurant they'd chosen, was everything I had never been, a world of opulence and display. The moment I stepped out of the car, I was struck by how foreign it all felt. Glass and chrome, the click of high heels on marble floors, a doorman tipping his hat as we entered. It was all so far removed from the life I had built, the life where love wasn't about the car you drove, or the restaurant you went to, but about the people you shared it with. Thomas walked ahead, leading the way, his gait sharp and assured. Emily followed, her heels clicking sharply with every step, a picture of elegance. I trailed behind, feeling the weight of every inch of distance between us. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I had spent so many years pouring everything into them, into our family, only to now be reduced to a shadow in their carefully curated life. We approached the hostess stand, and the young woman greeted us with a practiced smile. "Reservation for Fields, party of 3. She asked, as if she had already memorized the name. She handed us our menus, but Emily stopped her with a swift motion. "Wait," Emily said, her voice dripping with concern, but the kind of concern I knew too well. The one that wasn't really about me, but about appearances. "Look at this place. It's so loud, so overwhelming, don't you think? Lenora darling, are you sure you'll be okay?" She looked at me with that look that always made me feel small, the one that made me wonder if I was invisible to her, if she saw me at all, or if I was just something she had to tolerate. "I'm fine," I replied, though the words barely reached my lips. No, sweetie, you're not fine," Emily said, as if she were speaking to a child. "I can see you're already getting pale. Maybe you should wait outside. It might be too much for you." My heart cracked. I looked to Thomas, but his gaze avoided mine. Instead, he muttered, "She's right, Mom. It's probably better if you get some fresh air. You know how you get in crowded places." That was when I understood. They had planned this night from the beginning, not to celebrate me, but to display a family that didn't need me, to show off Thomas's success while leaving me behind, a forgotten figure. I was being sent away, dismissed as though I were an afterthought. Emily's hand reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small packet, wrapped in wax paper. It was a sandwich, dry stale turkey on white bread. "I made this for you," she said with a saccharine smile. "You can wait in the car. Fluffy will keep you company." Fluffy, their pampered dog, was already yipping inside her carrier, at Emily's feet. I stood there, staring at the sandwich, the weight of it sinking into me. This was it, the moment they chose to humiliate me, to send me to the car with their dog, while they dined inside on lobster and fine wine. They thought they were helping me. They thought this was for my own good, but it wasn't. It was for theirs. I didn't say a word as I turned away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply walked out, my heart heavy with the realization that this wasn't a celebration. It was a performance, and I wasn't invited to the show. The walk out of that restaurant, the stares from strangers, as I left with my dry sandwich in hand will haunt me for as long as I live. It wasn't just the cold night air that chilled me to the bone, it was the feeling of being discarded, of being invisible. They didn't care how I felt. They didn't care about the years I had spent raising them, sacrificing for them, hoping that one day they would return that love. No, to them I was just a problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be removed from their lives when it no longer suited them, a resource they could tap into but only when they needed something from me. And tonight they didn't need me, not at their perfect dinner, not at their perfect table. I made my way back to the car, the sandwich clutched tightly in my hands. As I opened the door and slid into the back seat, the smell of the leather seats made my stomach churn. This wasn't my car, this wasn't my world. I'd never belonged in this life, and I was painfully aware of it now. Fluffy, their little dog, sat in his carrier in the front seat, yipping in confusion, as if even he knew something was wrong. His little tail wagged hopefully as he stared at me, his innocent eyes looking for companionship, looking for comfort, and in that moment I realized that he was all I had left. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, but this silly dog. I unwrapped the sandwich slowly. The dry turkey on white bread felt like sandpaper in my mouth. It wasn't a meal, it was a reminder of how they had pushed me to the side, how they had reduced me to nothing more than a forgotten relic in their lives. The sandwich wasn't just cold, it was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Fluffy looked up at me as I ate, his eyes full of expectation. He wagged his tail, hoping for a piece of my meager meal, as if he could sense my need for something familiar, something real. I broke off a piece of turkey and gave it to him. It wasn't much, but it was something. We ate together in silence. The car parked just outside the restaurant, where my son and his wife were feasting on lobster and champagne. They were celebrating, while I was left with a sandwich and a dog, hidden in the shadows. I stared at the lights of the restaurant through the windshield, the laughter and chatter from inside seeping into the still night. It was as if the world was moving on without me. They were inside, celebrating their success, their perfect life, and I was here, forgotten, reduced to this eating cold turkey in the back of my own car. And in that moment, I felt a rush of anger. Not the kind of angry you scream about, but the quiet kind. The kind that burns slowly and steadily, until it's all you can feel. I was angry at Thomas. I was angry at Emily. I was angry at myself for allowing them to push me into this corner, for allowing them to make me feel small, worthless. But mostly, I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not fighting back when I had the chance. But I wasn't going to stay angry. No, this anger wasn't going to consume me. It was a fire, and fires can be controlled. This anger was going to be my fuel, my drive, the thing that would give me the strength to reclaim what was mine. They had humiliated me tonight. Yes, but I wasn't going to let them win. As I sat in that car with Fluffy, chewing on my sad little sandwich, I knew something had to change. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had gotten away with it, but they hadn't. I would make them regret this. I sat there in the dark, for what felt like hours, though I couldn't tell you how long it actually was. I don't even remember the last time I checked the clock, if I even had one in view. Time was irrelevant at that point. It had become one long bitter moment of realization. A moment when I understood that no amount of love, no amount of sacrifice, could change what they thought of me. It wasn't about what I had done for them. It wasn't about the years of selfless love I had given. It was about what they saw in me, what they needed me to be, and I wasn't that person anymore. As the hours passed, the anger within me slowly transformed. It didn't burn hot and reckless, like it had before. No, it cooled into something more calculated, something sharper, more precise. This wasn't the rage of an old woman scorned. It was the calm, steady fury of someone who had been pushed too far, someone who understood the game now, and I would play it on my terms. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't confront them emotionally. They would only dismiss me, call me hysterical, or worse, try to label me as not herself. They'd always underestimated me, always seen me as a fragile old woman who could be controlled, manipulated, and pushed aside. But they had made a grave mistake. I wasn't fragile, and I wasn't old. I was patient, and I was still the one with the power. I could feel the control slipping from their hands. They didn't know it yet, but they were already losing the one thing they cared about, their carefully constructed image. Their lives were built on appearances. How much money they could spend, how much they could flaunt to the world. The house in the suburbs, their designer wardrobes, their Lexus. It was all about image. But image was fragile. It could be shattered with a single misstep. I began to take note of their every move. I wasn't just going to sit idly by and let them continue treating me like a pawn. They were making mistakes. They were drowning in debt, and they didn't even realize how much trouble they were in. I overheard them one evening, the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, but I heard it all the same. Thomas, his voice tight with panic, pacing the floor as he spoke to the bank. His words were clipped, his breath short, as if he was trying to hide his fear. But I could hear it in the way he spoke. "I don't know what you want me to do," he said, his voice low and frantic. "The interest rate just adjusted. The payment is going to double. If we can't refinance, we'll lose the house. We can't afford this. Not with Emily's spending, not with everything piling up. We could lose it all." My mind clicked into focus as I absorbed every word. The house, the one they had insisted was just a stepping stone to a better life, the one they had wanted to sell for a profit, the one they had taken for granted, was slipping away from them. It wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable. They were drowning in debt, and they had no idea what was coming. I filed that information away, like a valuable piece of gold. This was it. This was my leverage. For the next few months, I became a ghost in their lives, a polite, distant presence. I made myself scarce. No more Sunday dinners, no more calls to check in. They thought I was weak, that I had resigned myself to my fate, but I wasn't resigned. I was waiting, watching. I was positioning myself to be the one who held all the cards, and they didn't even know it. The more I observed them, the clearer it became. They had underestimated me. They thought they were in control, that they could keep me in my place. But I could see the cracks in their perfect world, the constant whispers of financial struggles, Emily's complaints about the cost of living, even as she flaunted a new designer handbag every other week. Their lives were a house of cards, teetering on the brink of collapse. But they didn't know that I had all the pieces I needed. They thought I was too old to be a threat. But I was going to show them that I was a force they couldn't ignore. And when the time came, I would strike, quietly, without warning. They wouldn't see it coming. I had been waiting for it. I knew it was coming. The inevitable moment, when their carefully curated world, built on lies and financial instability, would come crashing down. And when it did, I would be there, standing quietly in the background, watching, as they begged for my help. That moment arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, just a few weeks after I had gathered all the information I needed. It was the kind of day that mirrored the heaviness in my heart, a cold, wet day, where even the sky seemed to mourn what was about to unfold. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my tea, watching the rain streak down the window, when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Thomas and Emily stood on the doorstep, dressed in their usual "we've got it all together" attire. Thomas had a forced smile plastered on his face, the kind he used when he was trying to convince people everything was fine, when everything was falling apart. Emily was beside him, her eyes red-rimmed, and her smile even more brittle than usual. They were desperate, and I could smell it in the air, thick and suffocating. "Mom," Thomas began, his voice unsteady, "we need to talk. It's important." I stood there for a moment, taking them in, allowing the silence to stretch between us. I had learned over the past few months that silence was a powerful thing. It made them uncomfortable, made them squirm. It put the power back in my hands, and I wasn't going to let that power slip away. Not now. I gestured for them to come inside, not saying a word. They walked in, their footsteps hesitant, as if they weren't sure whether this visit was one of reconciliation or one of desperation. "We've hit a rough patch," Emily said, her voice strained, her eyes searching mine for a sign of sympathy. She had been the one to hold the facade of control for so long, and now it was all unraveling before her. We've had some problems with the house, Thomas added, his gaze flickering nervously, between me and Emily. The interest rates adjusted, the payments are doubling, and we can't afford it, not with everything else going on. The bills are piling up, and we just don't know what to do. I felt the faintest twinge of satisfaction stir in me, but I hid it well. They were finally acknowledging what I had known all along, that they had been living beyond their means, pretending to have it all together, while drowning in debt. "You're our only hope, Mom," Emily continued, her voice breaking slightly, but I could see through the act. The desperation was real, but so was the calculation. If we don't get the money to pay the mortgage, we're going to lose everything. The house, we could lose the house, and that's everything to us. They were desperate, and desperate people make desperate pleas. But what they didn't realize was that I had already decided how this was going to play out. Thomas stepped forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his voice trembling. "Mom, please, we've tried everything, but with our credit, there's just no way we can get a loan from the bank. We need your help. We're family." That word, family. It had once meant something, but now it felt hollow. Family was supposed to be a bond of trust, of love, of respect. What they had given me was none of those things. They had used me, manipulated me, and now they thought I would swoop in to save them. I stayed silent, watching them with a calmness that unsettled them. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. They thought they could twist my arm, pull on the strings of guilt, but I wasn't going to fall for it, not anymore. Finally I spoke, my voice steady, almost serene. "So you want me to give you a loan," I said, the words hanging in the air, like a weight, "to help you keep your house?" "Yes," Thomas said quickly, his face lighting up with hope. "That's exactly it. We'd pay you back, with interest of course. We just need the money, to keep it from going into foreclosure. We can't lose it, Mom. You don't want to see us homeless, do you?" I met his gaze without flinching. I could see the fear in his eyes, but also the expectation. They thought I was still the same old woman, who would do anything for her son. They thought they could manipulate me, with the same tricks they'd always used. But they didn't understand that I had already seen through their facade. "I see," I said quietly. "You want me to bail you out of your mess. We're not asking for much," Emily said quickly. "Just a little help. Just enough to get us through this. You'd be helping your Mom. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. They had made me feel small, unimportant, insignificant for so long. Now they were asking me to save them. The same people who had dismissed me, who had humiliated me, were now begging for my help. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly, in front of me. "Well," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I'm afraid I can't just give you the money." Thomas's smile faltered, his hope quickly turning to confusion. "What do you mean? You can't help us?" "Oh, I can help," I said, my lips curling slightly in the corners. "But I won't be giving you a loan." They stared at me, unsure of what I meant, but I knew they didn't fully understand what I was getting. "I'll tell you what I'll do," I continued. "I will help you save your home, but I'm going to do it my way." The look of confusion on their faces was almost enough to make me laugh. They had no idea what was coming. The next few weeks passed in a blur of careful planning. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't make any grand gestures. No, I was too old and too wise to make a move that could be seen as an emotional outburst. The game was about patience, precision, and power. I had the upper hand now, and I wasn't going to squander it. I knew they were watching me, waiting for some sign of weakness, for a crack in my calm facade. But they had forgotten something I'd learned a long time ago. I wasn't the person they thought I was. I wasn't a frail, helpless old woman. I was a woman who had weathered storms, who had made decisions that mattered, who had seen the consequences of actions far worse than anything they could throw at me. They thought I would just hand them the money, that I would bail them out again, and everything would return to normal. But I had something far more satisfying in mind for them. One afternoon, as I sat quietly at my kitchen table, sipping my tea, my lawyer called. It was time. "Everything is set, Josephine," she said, her voice crisp and professional. The transfer is complete. You now officially own the mortgage note on your son's home. The bank has finalized everything, and it's in your hands. I hung up the phone, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. The satisfaction I felt wasn't one of joy. It was one of pure control, the kind you feel when you know you've outsmarted those who thought they were smarter than you. The first time they called me after that, I didn't pick up. I let the phone ring, their number flashing across the screen. I knew what they wanted. I knew the desperation in their voices would only grow louder, and I was more than ready for it. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time I answered. "Mom," Thomas began, his voice shaky. "We got the letter, the one from the lawyer. It's ridiculous. The late fees, the penalties. We didn't think you'd go through with it. You said you'd help us. And now we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties. It's insane." I could hear Emily in the background, whispering frantically to him. "Tell her to just waive the fees. Tell her we'll pay her back in a month. We just need a little more time. Please, Mom, don't do this." I let them talk, their words a mix of pleading and panic. But the cool, detached part of me was already in control. I wasn't going to be moved by their desperation. They had thought they could manipulate me, but I was the one holding the cards now. "Thomas," I said, my voice even, "you signed the agreement. You knew the terms. You knew what would happen if you didn't follow through." "We didn't." Who's cut off by the sound of his voice cracking, and I could feel the panic rising in him. "We didn't think it would come to this. Please, Mom, we can fix this. Just help us out." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch between us, letting him stew in the consequences of his own actions. I knew he thought he could still charm me, still manipulate me with his usual tricks. But this time, it wasn't going to work. "You have 90 days to sell the house," I said calmly, "and pay off the full balance, including the late fees and penalties. If it's not sold by then, I'll take legal ownership." "It's more grace than you ever showed me." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their shocked silence. "You're not serious," Emily finally said, her voice "You're really going to let us lose everything? This is our home." "You can't," I interrupted her before she could finish. "You were so worried about me being embarrassed at that restaurant," I said, my voice almost too calm. "You said leaving me in the car with the dog was for my own good. Well, I've come to believe that learning to live within your means, understanding the true weight of your obligations, and learning that actions have consequences, that's for your own good." There was a long pause on the line, the kind that speaks volumes. I could feel them struggle to comprehend what had just happened. I wasn't just rejecting their plea, I was taking their home, their security, everything they thought they had won. And I was putting it all back in my hands. "Mom, please," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't do this. We can't lose everything. We'll be ruined." "That's the point," I said. "You're going to learn what it means to live with the consequences of your choices. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore. You're going to have to figure it out on your own." The call ended abruptly. They didn't know what to say, and I didn't care. A few weeks later, the house was listed. It was a seller's market, but even that didn't help them. The price they asked for was high, but no one was interested in a house in their neighborhood that had been poorly maintained and overpriced. They had no choice but to sell at a loss, the kind of loss that drained their savings, and still, they owed me more. They moved into a cramped rental apartment, the kind they had once scoffed at. I heard the whispers about their downfall, the family members who were too embarrassed to offer more than sympathy. I didn't feel sorry for them, not for 1 second. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was weak, that I couldn't see through their lies. They had forgotten that I had built a life. I had built a legacy of strength, not weakness, and they had made the mistake of assuming I was too old to fight back. Now they would pay the price for their arrogance. Every time they paid rent, every time they struggled to make ends meet, they would remember the cold, dry turkey sandwich in the back of me. They would remember the humiliation they put me through. And they would remember that I never forgot.